Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Part 2, Christmas Past.
When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He listened for the clock, and the hour bell sounded with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand, and Scrooge found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were like those of the upper members, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm.
"Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge.
"I am."
"Who and what are you?"
Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past."
"Long past?"
"No, your past." Scrooge then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Well, Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." It put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise, and walk with me." The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. "I am mortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a cold, clear winter day with snow upon the ground. Good heaven!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." He was conscious of 1,000 odours floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. They walked along the road, Scrooge recognising every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some boys now came towards them in great spirits, and Scrooge knew them, every one. "These are but shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us." They left the high road by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick, with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof, and a bell hanging in it. "The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still." They went in, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall, to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff. But it's too late now." "What is the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. Well, there was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. "I have come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fan?" returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home, for good and all. Home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be that home is like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home, and he said, yes, you should, and he sent me in a coach to bring you, and you're to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes, "and are never to come back here. Oh, but first we are to be together all Christmas long and have the merriest time in all the world." "You're quite a woman, little Fan," exclaimed the boy. "Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered," said the ghost, "but she had a large heart." "So she had," cried Scrooge. "You're right, I will not gainsay it, Spirit, God forbid." "She died a woman," said the ghost, "and had, as I think, children." "One child," Scrooge returned. "True," said the ghost. "Your nephew." Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, "Yes." Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city. It was plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too it was Christmas time again, but it was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. "Know it?" said Scrooge. "I was apprenticed here." They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller he must have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Oh, bless his heart, it's Fezziwig, alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Ho there, Ebenezer! Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. "Oh, Dick Wilkins, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. "Bless me, yes, there he is, how he was very much attached to me." "Yo-ho, my boys!" said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas Eve, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up and clear away before you can say Jack Robinson." It was done in a minute. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. There was cake, and there was a great piece of cold roast, there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. And old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 prentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under the counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost, and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small?" echoed Scrooge. "Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much he deserves this praise?" "Well, it isn't that," said Scrooge. "It isn't that spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What's the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing in particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the ghost insisted. "No," said Scrooge. "No, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all." His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick!" This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect, for again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past. "It matters little," she said softly. "Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" he rejoined. "A golden one." "This is the even-handed dealing of the world," he said. "There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth." "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you, have I not?" "What then?" he retorted. "Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I'm not changed towards you." She shook her head. "Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so. You were changed. When it was made, you were another man. I release you from it." "Have I ever sought release?" "In words, no, never." "In what then?" "In a changed nature, in an altered spirit. If this had never been between us," said the girl, looking mildly but with steadiness upon him, "tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now?" "No." He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition, in spite of himself, but he said with a struggle, "You think not?" "I would gladly think otherwise if I could," she answered. "But if you were free today, would you choose a dowerless girl, you who weigh everything by gain?" "I release you, with a full heart, for the love of him you once were." He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed, "You may, the memory of what is past half makes me hope you will, have pain in this. But in a very, very brief time you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly, as an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you woke. May you be happy in the life you have chosen." She left him, and they parted. "Spirit," said Scrooge, "show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me?" "One shadow more," exclaimed the ghost. "No more," cried Scrooge. "No more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more." But the relentless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene and place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like that last that Scrooge believed it was the same until he saw her. Now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge in his agitated state of mind could count. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and the father came home, attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and the struggling, the joy, the gratitude and the ecstasy, they are all indescribable alike. It is enough that by degrees the children and their emotions got out of the parlour, and by one stair at a time up to the top of the house, where they went to bed, and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside, and when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed. "Belle," said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon." "Who was it?" Yes. How can I? Tut, I don't know, she added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. Mr. Scrooge. Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and as it was not shut up and he had a candle inside, I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat alone. Quite alone in the world, I do believe.
Spirit, said Scrooge in a broken voice, remove me from this place.
I told you these were the shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. That they are what they are, do not blame me.
Remove me, Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it.
He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which in some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it.
Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer.
Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting this with its influence over him, he seized the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form, but though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome with an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep.
That was part 2 of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Adapted and performed by Gary Andrews, with original music by Joy Tinniswood. A Christmas Carol is an Egotrip media presentation of an Archway Theatre Company production.